Today's episode is sponsored by HelloFresh. Stay tuned for a special offer that's basically free food. Also, before I start, I want to give a quick word. I appreciate everyone giving me their opinion on submissions with overused phrasing, but I need to apologize for my negative view on this. After seeing your opinion, I agree that certain circumstances and phrases are required and important to these stories and should not be seen negatively. But a few people took this as me saying I'm telling you what to write. That could not be further from the truth. Write what you want. I simply want submissions to follow the rules on my submission site, to be thoughtfully written, and avoid cliches that could make your unique encounter indistinguishable from others. Hear me out. Wanting well-written stories does not mean I'm telling you what to write, and it most certainly does not mean I don't appreciate what you send me. But when I'm only one guy, and so many people write stories, a lot of which write them in a rush, write them without any concern of quality, or even send in troll stories, which I have to deal with a lot, actually. It gets tiresome, but most of all, it doesn't just affect me. It affects it for everyone who sent a story, the thousands of people who are still waiting to hear theirs narrated, and would have to wait even longer to be heard. I'm just trying my best to share your stories with the world as effectively and quickly as I can. I appreciate each and every one of you who takes the time to share your story with us. Thank you. Now, today I have 6 allegedly true scary stories, featuring the cutest little good boy church grim you've ever heard of, a man who's made of plastic, and a man with no eyes. Prepare yourself for a very odd episode, and don't forget, you can send your stories to me at darkstories.org or darknessprevails.org/submit. Now, let's begin. The Plastic Man from Ike Inc. I'm a hard-working painter, painting houses for a living inside and out. In all the places I've worked, one particular job order stuck out. It was mid-March, a sort of perfect time for painting house exteriors, if it didn't rain or snow. Yes, snow. Welcome to Utah. Anyway, I received a job order to paint an exterior of a somewhat tall house in a new neighborhood. Skip a few days, I was finishing up on painting one of the bigger exterior walls, cleaning up the trash, and gathering up the supplies I used on that day. As I was picking up the last of the trash, I was suddenly feeling a sort of panic and dread. Confused, I thought, why is this happening to me? Why am I feeling like this? I stopped for a moment to gather myself and stood there, reminding myself that I was just tired and the heat could be getting to me. Just then, a small gray car pulled up in the front of the house, in front of me, in fact. As I looked at the car, I noticed that the windows were tinted, so I couldn't see the driver. The feeling of panic and dread soon was stronger than before, and this car was giving off those vibes. But why? It didn't make sense yet. Suddenly, the passenger window slid down, and I was shocked at what I saw. There was a man there, wearing a big smile on his face, and looking at me with empty, completely fogged over eyes. What disturbs me more, even to this day, is that his facial features looked polished and generic, like a Ken doll or a mannequin. My heart was racing at this point. I wanted to say something to him, but I couldn't. I tried to get a word out somehow, but nothing came out except for some awkwardly heavy breathing. The man then giggled, but the sound that came out was not from a grown man and sounded more like a 5 or 6-year-old child. It sounded distorted and monotone too. The man then leaned forward, looking up at me, then giggled again. When he did this, I saw more of his face. Still, his face looked so generic and plastic. His features didn't really stick out, as in they didn't look unique or different. I then noticed that his skin was shiny, not the kind of shiny where you put oil on your skin, but more like the way a plastic product looks in light. I wanted to run, but I was paralyzed, even intrigued by this. I thought that if I moved too fast, though, that this inhuman thing would get out of the car and attack me. After what felt like hours, the plastic man then leaned back into the car and looked forward, now motionless with that big smile still frozen on his face. He gave me a small grin and then winked before sliding the window back up and driving away. As soon as he was gone, I was breathing heavily again. It was like I had run a marathon. I was still trying to process what I saw. Who was he? Why did he look like that? And why did he have to stop right here and torment me? As I asked myself these things, I finally relaxed, taking a deep breath and then exhaling. I then packed up and went home. Still, the experience was on my mind. The next few days after that, nothing happened, and the car did not show up again. I was relieved by this, because to this day the experience still disturbs me. Even writing it down now gives me goosebumps. I had never been more confused and terrified. I can only pray it was some cruel and unusual prank, because if it wasn't, reality just doesn't make sense to me. Walgreens Stalker from Monetsanti. When I was 17 years old, I was a beauty advisor at my local Walgreens. I really loved the job. It was one of my first, and I actually enjoyed it as a teenager. I got along with everyone great, and I worked as hard as I could. There was one problem, though. There was this one guy I worked with who was a very pushy person and somewhat of a creep. I was stocking shelves one night, and while I was on a tall ladder, I had this urge to turn around, and there at the bottom of the ladder was the creepy guy, just staring up at me, not even moving. I looked at him and he didn't even react. He just kept on staring. I was young and ignorant, so I didn't think much of this. I brushed it off, as people say. Not to mention, I didn't like to judge people. I'd like to say here that I was not a good judgment of people's character. A few nights later, I was outside to walk home when creepy guy insisted on giving me a ride. I kept telling him no, and that I appreciated the offer, but he kept on insisting. He wouldn't stop asking no matter what I said or did. I was really tired, and I was a pushover, so I finally just said, fine. I got in his car and he drove me home, but he ended up leaning for a kiss before I got out. I told him sorry, but I didn't feel the same way. I thanked him for a ride and got out. The next night, Mom came to pick me up from the job. I had bought a couple of different colors of nail polish, and before I left, creepy guy came over to introduce himself as my boyfriend and began complaining to my mom about all the nail polish I was buying. What the hell was his problem? As I wanted to avoid any more confrontation, I just wanted to go home, so I told my mom I would meet her in the car. Things would only get creepier at work with this guy, and I did tell my mom on the way home that he definitely wasn't my boyfriend. That same night, I was downstairs looking at my old MySpace on the computer when I heard something fall on the deck in the backyard. When I turned around to look, expecting anything but what I saw, there was creepy guy's face peering in through my tiny basement window. I ran upstairs screaming, all while hearing more deck furniture crashing around on the deck. I ran upstairs to tell my mom about it. We all got into my sister's bedroom to hide from the guy, and as we headed to her bedroom, my mom and I see creepy guy's hands and face. He had begun cutting a hole through my bedroom screen window. He knew where my bedroom was, so I could only guess that this wasn't his first time at my house. We called the police. My mom yelled out that they were on the way, and I was hoping that that would be enough to scare him away. I think it did, because when the police arrived, they found only footprints on the deck under my bedroom window, as well as the pocket knife he had been using to cut his way in. Unfortunately, charges could not be pressed, because creepy guy's father was somehow politically involved. I ended up quitting my job instead, trying to get away from this creepy guy. I wish I could say that that's where the story ends, but that would be a lie. I'm severely dyslexic, which made it a nightmare to get my driver's license. So I didn't get my license until I was in my mid-20s, and I signed up for a local driving school. They didn't give me the name of the driving instructor. I was just happy to be working towards getting my license. When the first day of class came around, a small tan car pulled into the parking lot. I eagerly run out to the car to start my first driver's lesson. I noticed the instructor didn't move from his seat or move or look over to me. But I did notice that he was wearing a hat with dark glasses and a big jacket. Right away, this was odd. It was a clear, sunny, and extremely hot day. I ignored it. I gladly took the wheel and said hi. My driving teacher didn't really talk much, so I started driving, remembering all the things that I had learned, and trying my best at every second to drive perfectly. At one point, I'm about 2 miles away from home, and I'm feeling pretty awkward because the guy still hasn't talked yet. I was wondering what the heck was going on. The driving teacher took his glasses off and his hat, then looked at me, saying, "Hey, remember me? We used to work at Walgreens together." My heart sank. I could feel tears welling up in my eyes. It was the creepy guy. I tried my best to play it cool, saying, "Oh, I don't remember." But then the nerve of this guy, he started bringing up the night he tried to break into my room. He was explaining that he didn't want to hurt me. He didn't mean to scare me. My ears were burning red at this point. I told him it's all water under the bridge, still trying to play it cool. I just wanted to defuse his emotion. I began heading back to my house at this point, and creepy guy goes on to tell me about his life now, how he's in school, how he can't tell the difference between a girl's and boy's bathroom. Whatever. I just keep driving. I pull up to my house, but before I can get out, he locks the doors. Then he says, "Can't wait to see you for our next lesson." I unlock the door and just run out of the car. I never went back to that driving school ever again, and I'm terrified that I'll see him again somewhere. Now, a quick word from a very tasty sponsor. How hungry are you right now? 'Cause it's 4 p.m. where I live and I just had a beef stick and a coffee and I still need more. But I have to finish this episode. But luckily I don't have to do anything, because I'm still signed up to HelloFresh, the awesome meal kit delivery service. HelloFresh lets you cook delicious homemade food without having to go shopping. Recipes are quick, yummy, taking only around 30 minutes to make. Every week you get to pick from an extravagant menu of meals to choose from, out of 17 seasonal chef-curated recipes. And HelloFresh is crazy flexible. They have family plans, vegetarian plans, and more to fit your lifestyle, and you can change anytime you want. I'll be honest with you, HelloFresh is one of my favorite sponsors ever on this channel. It's a joy to promote things that I actually use and can actually recommend. I mean, just last night my wife and I had the best spaghetti and meatballs we've ever had, and it came from our HelloFresh delivery. Let's just say zucchini with spaghetti is truly top-tier fooding. So stop missing out and help out the show. Get $80 off your first month of HelloFresh by going to hellofresh.com/DPP80 and using code DPP80. That's hellofresh.com/DPP80 and code DPP80 to get $80 off your first month. That's like 8 free meals. So happy eating. Thanks, HelloFresh. Now with full bellies, let's get back to the show. Nighttime Wanderer from AmmeJeanRomeo. This is a story that happened to me when I was around 8 or 9 years old. For a bit of background, at the time I was living in a large 4-bedroom house with my dad and brothers. Back then, my siblings and I had a habit of switching bedrooms. They were all pretty similarly sized and decorated, the only differences being the color of the carpet. I usually slept in the second room down the hall, as it was a wee bit larger than the other rooms, and the shape gave me ample room to play with toys and mess around, as kids do. However, one night I decided I wanted to sleep in the next bedroom over. It was smaller and closer to the bathroom, with a view that overlooked the houses behind it. I had just been tucked into bed and bade goodnight by my dad. Usually, he always left the door open a crack, but on this night, he had accidentally shut the door all the way. Something he did on occasion without really thinking. Back then, I was deathly afraid of the dark, due to a prior, creepy experience in the house, in a room I would no longer enter. But that's a different story. I sat there for several minutes, debating with myself whether to just go to sleep and be a big girl, or get up and open the door. Eventually, I felt my fear went out, and with a small whimper, I got up out of bed and headed over to the door to open it and set it ajar. Just as I was about to reach for the door handle, I heard a sound outside. Thump. It sounded as if something had fallen down outside my door. My hand was hovering in the air still at this point, and I let it drop to my side. I gulped nervously and continued to listen. Thump. Thump. The 2 thumps were accompanied by the sound of squeaking floorboards. I felt a sense of relief, believing it was just my dad outside the door, moving something around. It was only 7:30 p.m. after all, well before my parents usually went to bed. Feeling a little bit braver, I turned the handle and opened the door, only to find no one there. I stuck my head out of the doorway, looking down both ends of the hallway, and he was nowhere in sight. I felt tears begin to prick at my eyes as I shouted for my dad, screaming that someone was outside my door. Dad came running up the stairs and down the hallway, brandishing a rolling pin of all things. He searched the whole house as I cowered in my brother's room, and of course he didn't find anything. All the doors and windows were securely locked. Even my dad, my intelligent, no-nonsense dad, was spooked by this. For a week or 2 after this, we slept in the same room, so that Dad could keep an eye on us. This wasn't the last experience I had at that house, and I was so grateful when we finally moved out a 1.5 years later. Even now, I am still terrified by the memories of that place. Graveyard Puppy from MythologyLovesHorror. If you grow up in England, there's a story that you'll hear. One of those old legends that's all but died out in our modern era. It isn't popular anymore, but the tale of the Church Grim still gets whispered around the fires at night and told in hushed tones to curious children. While it isn't as bloody or monstrous as some stories, its power comes from how real it is. The Church Grim is a type of spirit that oversees the welfare of the church where it was buried. It helps protect the churchyard. Whenever a new graveyard was built, it was believed that the first person buried there had to spend eternity guarding the other souls. So in order to prevent a human from shouldering this burden, a stray black dog was sacrificed. When I was 8 years old, my grandma shared this knowledge with me, which had been passed down from her family who came to the United States from Europe. I'm now ashamed to admit it, but back then I didn't believe her. I called her a liar to her face, too, and I told her that ghosts aren't real. I remember how sadly she looked at me, and now I wish I had trusted her words. One night, not long after I turned 17, I was coming back from my boyfriend Max's house. A thick blanket of dark clouds had gathered that night, and I was hurrying along so that I wouldn't get caught in the storm. Fog had started to creep across the ground, and I was trying not to trip when I heard a hurt-sounding whimper. I followed the noise until I was at the gates of our town's graveyard, which nearly made me decide not to go in. You see, there had been a string of murders in the area lately, and as I didn't have any form of protection on me, I didn't want to be alone any longer than necessary. Then the sound came again. My heart twisted. I couldn't just ignore an animal that was in trouble, so I took a nervous breath and pushed open the wrought iron gate. I cringed as the hinges squealed, but I continued forward. I called out quietly to the dog as I weaved among the headstones, but in the gathering fog, my phone's flashlight was not doing me much good. I thought I saw its eyes glinting once, but it was just the glassy eyes of a doll leaning up against a headstone. I was about to abandon my search, especially since my sneakers were beginning to soak through, when I saw a little black puppy. It was curled up next to an unmarked headstone in the furthest corner of the graveyard, and even from 10 feet away I could see the poor thing shivering. I called out to it, and I smiled as it perked its ears up towards me. My voice carried the excited tone that most dogs loved, but the puppy hardly seemed to acknowledge me. I moved in closer, and when it didn't try to run away, I gently scooped it up. It let out another whimper, and I began to check it over for injuries. As I was examining it, I noticed that it was wearing a raggedy old collar with a tag, and apparently its name was Kirk. He seemed fine, and he had even given my hand a friendly, tentative lick. My plan was to take the poor thing home. Then tomorrow I could figure out who it belonged to. He gave me a happy little woof, and I could almost believe that he understood me as I spoke my plans for him out loud. I was about to turn around and head for the gate when Kirk jumped out of my arms. His hackles were raised. I didn't see anything, but I heard the sound of hushed voices. Quickly, I shut off my light, moving quietly over to a large gravestone to try and conceal myself. I paused, careful not to make a sound, and I panicked as I caught pieces of the conversation. "Are you sure she's there?" "Yeah, definitely saw her light. When we catch her, gotta make sure she..." "Then slit her. Slice her up just like..." That was all I was able to hear, but it was enough. I needed to leave, and I frantically tried to get Kirk's attention. He wouldn't turn his head, though, and his hackles were slowly raising even more. I was starting to shake, but before I could move to pick him up, he began to growl. "Kirk," I said. I was still down on my knees, my hand outstretched, when Kirk's growl deepened into that of an adult dog. I couldn't really see him that well without my flashlight, but as I watched, the level of his eyes seemed to begin to rise. Then he let out a bone-chilling howl, and he bounded out of sight, and I could have sworn he was much bigger than when I found him. A moment or two later, one of the men let out a surprised shout, and within seconds, I could hear anguished screams and violent snarls. A gun fired, and I was scared that Kirk was hurt. But the next thing I knew, The men screamed, and the sounds of rapid footsteps began to leave the cemetery. I turned the flashlight back on, not caring about hiding when I fully believed that I would be fleeing soon, but I instantly regretted my decision. There sat Kirk sitting before me. His mouth was bloodied, and he was just as tiny as before. I was afraid, but for some reason I felt perfectly safe in picking him up and hugging him close to me. It wasn't him I was afraid of, and I couldn't help but say thank you through a few tears. After he nudged his head against mine, I set him back down, and, still trembling, I carefully made my way out of the cemetery. The whole way Kirk followed me, up to the point that I crossed the threshold at the gate. When I did, I turned back, and Kirk was gone. I knew then that my grandma had been right all along. The Church Grimm are real. I thoroughly believe that now. And no matter how scary they may appear, they're only there to protect the graveyards. And if you don't mean any harm, you've got nothing to worry about. The Telltale Bark, from Marisa. This isn't necessarily the type of story that might keep you up at night. However, I was amused by it, and I knew I had to share. I live in a rural town in Texas. We have quite a mixture of characters here. For instance, old Mr. Miller, who was an exceptionally odd man, to say the least. A loner and a bitter man, Miller wasn't someone you'd want to give a smile or even a polite wave to, because you'd never know how he would react. He lived by himself and raised cattle to be sold for their meat. Everything in town was business as usual, until something indescribably tragic began to happen. One by one, most of the dogs in town started to get very sick and die inexplicably. No one could figure out what was causing such a thing. People were talking to one another about it, as there was no explanation yet. Even the local vet, at that time some 20 years ago, could not find any answers. One day, old Miller was at the local feed store and happened to let the word slip. Damned kids and their dogs. Keep messing with my cows. Won't be a problem much longer. Well, that's all it took. A couple of the locals started watching him a little closer, following him even, waiting to see if he was indeed to blame for the horrible situation. Sure enough, a guy I'll call James and a few of his friends saw Mr. Miller drop a piece of meat out of his old pickup truck, where two dogs happened to be lying out under some shade. James and his friends ran as fast as they could to intercept it, and Miller drove off like a bat out of hell. Turns out that crazy old man was putting cyanide inside the meat and feeding it to the dogs. Here's where the amusing part of the story comes into context. James's dad had a unique way of mimicking a dog's bark, and would often mess with his son's friends by sneaking up behind them and barking in places where no dog should be. It was all in good, weird fun, I suppose. After discovering who was to blame for the deaths of so many people's dogs, James's dad decided to give old Miller a call. Only instead of saying a solitary word, you could probably guess it, he barked over the phone to the sound of nothing but silence on the receiving end. He did this every few nights, until Mr. Miller got the message. Never again did another dog meet the fate of old Mr. Miller and his demented ways. The Man with Empty Eye Sockets, from MariahSinger. I'm 24 years old and live in Missouri. When I was about 3 or 4 years old, my mom's stepdad and I went up to St. Louis to visit my stepdad's sister and her family. I don't remember much about what we did that day, but I do remember almost every detail of that night after everyone went to bed. My stepdad had a room upstairs next to my stepcousin's rooms. My aunt and uncle had a room on the main level, and my mom and I were in the living room on the main level. In the living room, there were 2 couches that faced each other with a coffee table in the middle. I was on one couch, and my mother was on the other, snoring away. Being in a place that wasn't my own bed, I found it hard to sleep. While lying down, I eventually started playing with a stuffed animal I had. I was playing with it for a few minutes when it happened. Suddenly, I had a terrible feeling someone was watching me. It was extremely strong, and unlike anything I've ever experienced, it shot fear right through me and made me feel panicked. I looked straight up since that's where I felt it was coming from, and what I saw will forever haunt me. There was an eerie-looking man in some kind of uniform looking straight down at me, smiling. But what scared me most were his eyes, which were just empty black sockets. He looked evil. I would find it hard to believe that a good spirit would manifest this way. I gasped, pulling the covers over my head. I remember shaking and sweating as I thought to myself, "This isn't right. This isn't right." After a few minutes, I finally got the courage to peek from behind my blanket and found nothing. The man was gone. I jumped up and ran over to the couch my mom was on. I shook her, trying to get her awake. I remember frantically whispering to her, "Mommy, Mommy, there's a man standing over me." In her half-asleep state, she told me it was just a dream and that I needed to go back to bed. I curled up on the couch next to her as best I could, and I looked around. I could still feel someone watching me, but I could no longer see anyone there. So I pulled the covers over my head and softly cried until I could no longer stay awake. I'm 24 now. I'm not sure what I saw back then. My only guess is that it was some kind of negative spirit lingering around the house. My step-aunt's husband was an alcoholic, so I wonder if the spirit was attracted to his lower vibration. But why would a spirit manifest itself like that, to a little girl of all people? Why would it have empty eye sockets? I'm not sure. I just don't want to see anything like that ever again. Life-size dolls, cutest little puppies, and helpful coworkers. Today's episode was awfully heartfelt. It just goes to show you that the world is creepy, always, at all times, no matter what you do or say. Sorry, and good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you want to hear your story in a future episode, share it with us at darkstories.org or darknessprevails.org/submit. If you want to support the show, be sure to help our sponsors out by clicking the link below and using code DPP80 to get $80 off your first 4 boxes of HelloFresh. Or you can try the other links below in the description to support me on Patreon, buy some of my merchandise, or start investing with Acorns, which helps me out too. Now, as usual, here are my 5 favorite early comments from the previous video, titled Never Go Camping Alone. 5 true wilderness scary stories. Rain says, more like never go camping, stay inside your home. Well, if I stay inside all day, how can I go camping in the rain? Jaron Kaiser says, never go camping alone, huh? Does Jack Daniels count? I feel like there's a whole world of alcohol jokes that I'll never understand. I think my dad always telling me when I was a kid that beer tasted like pee has completely turned me off alcohol. No Need says, new drinking game. Take a shot every time the woods go silent. Makes it easier for me to catch you when you're in my woods. There's no need for me to take a shot for you to find me in your woods without clothes. Shady Dawn Pictures says, I could see that phrase, "the woods went silent," being annoying, but that being said, in the situation, I'm pretty sure that would be something that would stand out and stick with you. Just look at it from another form of so-and-so, or let's not meet. I can definitely agree now, but I also think there's a lot we could be missing besides that circumstance. I mean, surely there's more to describe than simply the woods going silent. For example, the woods going still. Sometimes you see those descriptions together, but more often than not, you see just the whole quiet part. But what would be really freaky is how still the woods get. It would feel like you're in a painting, a creepy painting at that, when something was about to happen. Basically, give me more description, then I'll be happy. And Bailey O'Donnell says, "Why does everyone run away from me?" I don't think that has anything to do with the video, and I hope you find a friend one day, Bailey. If we run into each other, I'll give you a hug. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode. But don't you worry, because more scary stories are on the way soon. So stay tuned. Until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. They're great people. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.